Started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinar series put on by LifeBridge. You can go ahead and kick it forward. Let's see. Just a couple housekeeping items. We'll have a 1-hour presentation today with time for Q&A. It is being recorded so that we can have this on the LifeBridge website so that people who were not in attendance today, or if you want to watch it again, they can pop over to the website, get that, and get 1 hour of CME credit. Any resources that are mentioned will be linked and sent also to the webinar participants via email. And we do encourage questions. You can submit them anytime using the Q&A chat feature. If you'd like them to be anonymous, please send them to Lindsay privately in the chat, and she'll make sure those questions get answered. We did have a great number of questions submitted ahead of time, so thank you for that. If you have additional questions, you can put them in the chat feature and we'll make sure that they get answered. Disclosures, there aren't any for the speaker. The accreditation comes through the Nebraska Medical Education Trust and designates the webinar for one AMA Category 1 credit, and you should not complain, but claim only the one credit for this activity. It's sponsored by the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education through a joint sponsorship with the NMA and the Educational Trust for LifeBridge Nebraska. And the Nebraska Medical Education Trust is accredited by the Nebraska Medical Association to provide continuing medical education for physicians. I am very pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Stephen Abels with Mark Street Financial. Stephen serves his clients with integrity and principled wisdom in every interaction. Prior to joining Estate and Wealth Planning, Stephen most recently served as president of Income and Wealth Planning for a Fortune 500 company where he led a $2 billion business unit focused on protecting families and preparing them for retirement through sound financial advice. With the heart of a teacher, Stephen seeks to understand clients' goals, challenges, and opportunities in order to craft a personalized strategy and solution that best serves the client and their families. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen, and he's going to take it away.
All right. Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. I realize for at least some of our participants here, it's an hour earlier for you. So count me impressed. So I've had a number of good questions ahead of time. I'm going to cover sort of a short, you'll be glad to hear it's on the short side, but some thoughts about thinking about retirement. And this is really garnered. I can give you a little bit of background first, and that will make some of the presentation make sense. Then we can get to questions and Q&A. The background for Mark Street Financial is it was actually founded by Liz is my managing partner, and we are the owners of the practice. She is my sister, and so it was founded by our father in 1988. It was a family-owned practice. He retired from the Air Force. And my parents are both from north central Iowa, Grundy County area, if you're familiar with that area of Iowa. And the farm across the road from our family farm had to be sold to pay for the taxes. This did not sit well with Dad. And he said he got an interest in estate planning and helping people avoid those kinds of issues in retirement or in passing things to generations. So he started the firm in 88. Liz started with him when she graduated from college in 2001. He retired in 2010. She bought the practice from him, grew it to a point where she was at capacity. And we've been talking for a little while. I'm an actuary by training. That's what those initials behind my name mean. And I spent 30 years on the corporate side doing risk management and helping to make businesses successful. And it's been great the last few years where we're taking those same techniques and modeling approaches, and we're helping to make individuals successful. So as far as we can find, we are the only FSA, CFP, combination in the US. So you can call us weird. We'll at least say we're rare. So with that, I'll jump into the presentation. I don't know if Lindsay, does it work best to just kind of save questions to the end, or will there be alerts along the way? What works
Sure,
best?
I'll monitor the chat and I can jump in if there's a pertinent question. Otherwise, we can save them till the end.
Okay, perfect. To share, optimize for sharing. Try to get the right screen up here. Hopefully that's you're seeing the presentation there with just the logo. Excellent. All right. So I gave a little bit of background on Mark Street Financial. My name is Stephen Abels. It's really a privilege to be here. Thank you, Joanne, for having me, and Lindsay for having me. We're happy to share. I wanted to start with this picture, and this may be a weird way to start a financial presentation, but I like it because it reminds us of some really important things. This was taken last summer at our niece's wedding. This is my wife and I and our 4 kids. And the reason I like this picture is it reminds me of some very critical things that are important about retirement, and the mind shifts that had to happen along the way. So when I started, my wife and I met, and we decided that we were going to get married. That was a number of years ago, actually 31 years ago. And when I look back in those times and I think about the mindset shifts that had to happen, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be celebrating 31 years. Us replaced me, right? I started having to think in terms of two. There were a lot of give and take that was involved, and a lot of significant shifts that had to happen. That first year of marriage is famous for being a little bit rocky, right? Ours wasn't bad, but required a lot of mindset shifts. And then you see that we are not the only people in that picture. We have 4 children. They are ages 17, 20, 22, and 24. And I have vivid memories. Caroline, who's on the right, is our oldest. And when we brought her home from the hospital, we had spent about 2 days, and there were always nurses available. And when she cried, they would tell us what the issue is, et cetera. Parenting was brand new for us. And from the hospital here in Omaha, and she started crying, and I remember the panic that swept over both of us as we heard her howling in the back, and thought, where are the nurses? Where's our help? We had to make a mindset shift because, we like to sleep in on Saturday. We like to have our own schedule. And here came someone into our family who didn't care and had a lot of demands and things. And of course, that repeated itself 3 more times, and there's our family. Along the way, we had to make a lot of mindset shifts, not because we were wrong before, but because our situation had changed. And that's what I'd like to leave us with today, is I want to cover some of those basic mindset shifts that are going to be really important to success in retirement. This is a graph that helps illustrate a little bit what I'm talking about. So on the left, you kind of see, this is going time-wise from left to right. You see an accumulation phase here. In early, mid, and late are kind of phases within that. Think of that as your career working years, or at least most of them. When you started your career, maybe coming out of med school, it seemed like there's a lot of time that is left for retirement. And that arc that is rising through the graph there, that symbolizes as you begin to get income. And if you were like me and came out of college with pretty much everything I owned that would fit in the trunk of my car, well, that's probably changed for you now. And as you've accumulated more things, you start entering into a phase, that blue section, which is the protection phase. That protection phase, think of it as kind of one economic cycle before you need to start taking income from these assets. That's usually a typical economic cycle would be anywhere from 7 to 12 years. So if you were counting on retirement at 65, you're entering that blue phase if you are in your early 50s. And that's where you have to start doing something different, a mindset shift in strategy, because what got you there is not going to get you successfully to where you need to go. And then the green there is distribution. You can see those assets falling off. We have walked through many, many cases with people who have retired And it's a little like the first time you looked at a high dive and decided you were going to jump off. I think we probably all remember our first time off a high dive. And I remember looking down and thinking, this is way higher than it looked when I was standing down on the pool deck. And retirement's a little bit like that, with toes over the edge. This thing that you'd been thinking about and planning for a long time suddenly becomes real. And there's a lot of mindset shifts that go with that, and we help people walk through that as well. But this graph is a good anchoring way to think of things, because as you go from orange into blue into green, you need to shift your strategy in order to be successful for what comes next. So retirement is different. A lot of people have this intuition about it, but there are three main things that we're going to look at that need to be a mindset shift. The first is, and I'm going to share a visual here so it'll make a little more sense. Think in terms of income, path of dollars. If you're like me, for decades in my early working years, all I thought about was, what do I need to accumulate to successfully retire? What do I need to accumulate to successfully retire? And this was fueled a little bit by some firms who even advertise that way. What's your number? Do you have your target? And they start to imply that successful retirement is about a single number. It's not. The reason is because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. What that number needs to be depends on what the future ends up turning out to be. So thinking less in terms of assets and more in terms of income, a path of dollars. The second one would be timing is everything. We're going to go through an example here, and it's something that most people intuitively feel, but you may not realize exactly why timing is so important. And I don't mean jumping in and out of the market. That is almost a fool's game, because you have to be correct twice. You have to get out at the right time, and you have to get back in at the right time. I'm talking about a different kind of timing. We'll cover that. And then the last is your priorities just changed. And as we talk to people who are headed toward retirement, it is amazing to me that almost without fail, they can feel this change, this shift. They can't always put words to it or say exactly why it's happening, but those market drops bother them more than it used to. And we'll explain why that is, and that they're not wrong. That's actually an intuition that we have embedded in us that is realizing a shift in the environment around you, and protection becomes a bigger deal than chasing that next percent of return. So here's the path of dollars. In retirement, income is the supreme idea, not assets. Assets are important, but they're really only useful to the extent they can be used for income, because we have to spend dollars for housing, groceries, rent, eggs, right? Fuel. During our careers, these dollars primarily came from our working active income, dollars in, dollars out. In retirement, many of these dollars need to come from assets that we've accumulated for retirement. How much do I need to save for retirement shifts to how much can I afford to spend in retirement? And am I okay shifts to how okay am I? And this means a strategy for retirement income, and that becomes more important than a strategy for growing the nest egg, because you're entering a new phase. We looked at that on that orange, blue, and green phase graph. We have to make a mindset shift to facilitate this healthy retirement. Oh, I'm going to go back to this a little bit. You'll notice here that I have some of these dollars. What this represents is, if you were standing on the cusp of retirement, day one, and you're looking at, what do I need for income? Think of these dollars as maybe the income you would need in each of the years that are coming up. Now go back in time to when you first started your career. For someone who is 30 years old and they're planning to retire at age 65, the difference in strategy for the first dollar they'll need in 35 years and say the last dollar they may need in 65, that's not really much of a difference in strategy. The same strategy and the rules of thumb really kind of work that early in their career. But as they enter that protect and distribution phase, suddenly that's not true anymore. As you get closer to beginning to start income in retirement, the strategy for the dollar you need next year has to differ drastically from the strategy for the dollar you may need in 36 years. And that's kind of what this visual is giving us is a representation of that idea. There are dollars you'll need that are in the soon category, and the next and the later. Here's an example. I wanted to talk about the importance of timing. You may be familiar with the concept of dollar cost averaging. Excuse me. Retirees often find that market volatility bothers them to a degree that it never did during their working career. And they wonder if they've changed, or if they've missed something, or if maybe they've just become more timid. The answer is actually no. It's an insightful intuition, even if they don't realize why. So let's explore why this is true. We'll start with this example of dollar cost averaging. Now, the idea on dollar cost averaging is, here's someone who is a net buyer of stocks. And I've tried to simplify this down just for the sake of example. Suppose you are a saver, you have good money habits, you are working in your career, and you've decided, I'm going to save $12 a month, and I'm going to purchase stock. No matter what the market does, I'm going to dedicate $12 a month towards savings. And here's the stock price during those months. Starts at $4, goes to $2 higher, goes to $2 lower, and then comes back to $4. For someone who is dedicating $12 each of these months toward the purchase and accumulation of assets, they're going to end up spending $36 into that investment. But at the end of this investment, even though the market is exactly where it was when they started, they now have a portfolio that's worth $44. And really the magic is the fact that they had the discipline in month 3 to buy stocks when they could get it for $2 a stock. By committing $12 to those stocks, they got 6 shares of stock, which then rose to $4 by our month 4. This is called dollar cost averaging, and it's been a tried and true method for years. Here's the problem with dollar cost averaging, is that volatility, when you are accumulating assets, is your friend, but it turns around and becomes your enemy when you're taking income from your assets. Now, to step there, let's consider what happens if that market was flat. In the same situation where they had set up $12 going in each month, buying at $4 a share each month, here's where this is a nice smooth ride in the market, but they didn't take advantage. That volatility is what really helped them when they were buying a net buyer of stock. But consider the same example for this person if they turn around and they are now retired. Now they're taking assets and they're turning them into income, and they're saying, I need $12 a month. And the interesting thing about the income that we need from our assets is it doesn't matter. You can't go to the grocery store and say, I'm sorry, the markets are down, I need things at 20% less. That doesn't work. We need dollars. And so they need $12 regardless of what the market does. Here's the same pattern we started with. Starts at $4, goes up $2, goes $2 higher than it was, then $2 lower than it was, and then back to where it started. If you're taking income, the exact opposite of what we saw in the first example happens. You're taking $12 out, but your portfolio, even though it ended up 4 months later where it started, because you took income along the way, your portfolio value went down $44. Volatility becomes your enemy. And so that feeling that people as they approach retirement and they begin to internalize, hey, these market drops really start bothering me more than they used to, is really a God-given intuition that they understand more than they realize that they're entering a new phase and they need a mindset shift. Timing does matter. And it went from helping you, that volatility in your saving years, to being your enemy in your spending years. And these mean that you need a new strategy to help with that. A lot of times we think of risk, and we use this visual quite a bit in our practice because it's a good kind of jumping off place for some helpful conversation. You can think of the risk continuum as, well, if I'm taking more risk, I'm really kind of moving further to the right on this slide. There's higher gains possible, and there's also also higher negative losses that are also possible with taking more risk. And the emotion in a market like we've had the last few weeks, where it's been a roller coaster ride, people have a tendency to want to flee to the left. They say, I want to park my money on the sidelines, or I want to roll it into a CD. And what they're doing is they're just making a trade-off. They're going from a bucket that may go up and down with the market to something that has very low upside, but also has very low downside, and it feels safer for them. And what we help people do, and it's one of those mindset shifts you have to embrace in retirement, is you need to be careful not to run from one risk and run smack into another risk. Because one of the other risks that you run into if you're planning for a 30 to 40-year retirement is inflation. Your money still needs to be working for you. And if you park it too far to the left, you're never going to have enough growth to be able to fuel your successful retirement. So you need a strategy that will enable that, along with addressing the downside, because timing does matter now. So here's our changing priorities. Protection as you move toward retirement becomes a bigger deal. When you're 20 or 30 and you have multiple economic cycles before you're going to need these dollars, time's on your side. You don't need to protect those dollars. You need return. And that's correct. That is the most important thing at that phase in your early working career. But as you transition into the middle part of that career and start heading toward that protection and the distribution, we have a number of demonstrations that we'd like to share with folks just to illustrate this. We won't walk through them today, but where we say, let's suppose you earned 1 or 2% more on all of your assets. What difference would that make in terms of your max spending in retirement? Great. Now, what difference would it make if we could knock out some of the bad potential scenarios? That protection, what's it worth? And we can actually estimate in dollars how much that protection is worth. It's pretty stunning. And so as a general rule of thumb for that mindset shift, think protection, think about what your strategy is for that downside, knowing the timing example that we just went through. So mind shift 1, income versus assets. Income is really the way you want to start thinking about things as you approach that need for those assets as you approach retirement. Mindset shift 2 is volatility. Timing does matter. Remember, volatility, your friend when you're a net buyer. Volatility is your enemy when you are a net taking income. And then mind shift 3, return versus protection. That's kind of sort of a wrapper comment on the first two, but protection does begin to loom more important. And return, which is always the water cooler talk. Do you have the latest hot stock, or how's your portfolio doing? That is a shift that has to happen. Protection actually probably less popular at the water cooler, but actually means more, especially as you approach those retirement years. So with that, I'll drop my screen share here. And are there any questions? Lindsay, do you want to just feed those out, or I have some that were submitted ahead of time? I can certainly cover those.
Sure. I'll watch the chat for some, but we did have a couple that came in earlier. So one of those, if you could speak to how to have various buckets available for tax efficient filling or using as a retiree, especially if they're retiring before Social Security. Yes.
Yeah. And Social Security, the nice thing with Social Security is it's just part of the picture, right? It's one of the puzzle pieces in the overall. It certainly is unnerving when we hear news reports that, someone is rumoring to be considering cuts, or maybe for people who haven't started it yet, there might be 25% less. We've all heard those. Not sure if those are true or not, but Social Security is kind of a public pension. The nice thing is that there are a lot of ways to sort of create that same idea for yourself. And you're not reliant then on some future Congress deciding whether that's still a good idea or not. And so, these are strategies that you can employ. The buckets, I would point back to that path of dollars that we looked at. That's the way to think of it. Think of it in terms of, what do I need soon? What do I need in the intermediate term? And what will I need eventually? Many times by just bifurcating those, that will help put you in the right mindset to make good decisions. Right? If I were driving from Omaha to Chicago, first few hours of the trip, I just need to head east. I don't have to be that accurate. Rules of thumb are fine, right? And financial paths are a little bit that way. As I get closer to my destination, rules of thumb begin to fail me. I'll end up in the wrong part of Chicago and never be heard from again, right? So you start using GPS and you start being a little more precise in that regard. Let me see. What other questions do we have? I think I just pulled up the.
Yeah, we did have one too. If you want to speak a little bit to that
Mhm.
FIA products that allow for yearly 401k contributions rather than lump sum contribution at retirement.
Yeah, so just interpreting for the group and anyone who listens to the recording later, an FIA is short for fixed indexed annuity. It is one of the techniques that is available. Whether it's a good idea will depend on your situation, but it is one of the ways to kind of establish that personal pension idea to set up streams of income on your own portfolio. One of the challenges with something like that is a lot of times they do require sort of a rollover, like you're rolling over a 401k or a 403b into that type of material, that type of unit. How much future deposits are allowed varies from company to company. The nice thing is you can own more than one. And so you could even approach it as, for example, I'm thinking of a particular company where they allow you to continue to contribute to one of these contracts if you had one in place for 18 months. So that takes care of 18 months. So you had a couple of years there. And then you can always get another contract down the road. And their minimum contract size is, I think it's 50,000. And so you could actually save every 2 or 3 years and get a new contract and actually be layering these streams of income for yourself. So there are ways that can be addressed. I think that was the intent of the question. So.
We had another one that was, do you have any advice for early retirement due to health issues before Medicaid eligibility?
Yeah. So, as everyone on this call is probably aware, the landscape for medical coverage has changed a lot in the last 10 or 20 years. Some places there's choice where there wasn't, and other places there's not choice where there used to be. We have a number of people who have retired, clients who have retired early, a lot actually. It depends on the situation. So the general advice is almost anyone who is licensed and qualified to help like sort through all of the options there, they're pretty much going to be sorting through the same options for you. It's not like I know a guy and that's worth a lot. They're all looking pretty much at the same options. So you have the public exchanges or ACA that's available. There are also some private coverages as well. For individuals, prices that we're seeing would be in the 20,000 range. For individual couples might be lower 20s. If it's a family, it gets toward 30. If you are leaving an employer and you're a W-2 employee, you may have access to continuing their coverage as well. That is usually not your best option, but again, it depends on a lot of times by the time you add what you were contributing to what your employer was contributing, and then add 2 to 10%, a lot of times there's a better deal to be found elsewhere. So that's probably the general advice I could give. It would vary on specific situation, how long, that sort of thing. But we see a lot of people who are hesitant to retire because they say, I need the medical coverage. That's a little bit of a farce. It's there. And for many people, we can show them you could actually retire now. How much is renting your life one day at a time really worth? And we've had a lot of people early retire because they just didn't know what all the options looked like, and it looked like a good trade-off for them. So.
We have a couple that came in. One, could you provide any comment about conversion of traditional funds to Roth as one moves into retirement and lower income, whether 401 or 403?
Yes. Yeah. Great question. Roth conversions. Roth conversions are one of those tools that takes a tax risk off the table. We think in a lot of times in terms of market risk. Hey, the market's up, the market's down, is volatile. We don't think about all the other risks of inflation. One of those that this is addressing is tax risk. And I actually have, give me just a second and I will pull it up. I have a good display for that is a little bit stunning. Sorry, I meant to have this one up ahead of time. Of course, I'm looking for it and I can't find it. It's a graph that we share that shows historically where the top federal marginal tax bracket has been. I'm in the same boat during my career. Wow, I'm not seeing it right now. I do apologize. During my career, I have oftentimes made the same assumption that many of you have, that taxes are as high as they've ever been. That's not even remotely close to true. They're actually historically low. Many people don't realize that Ronald Reagan, when he was early in his career making his movies, refused to make a third movie in a year. And it was not for artistic reasons. It was because if he made that third movie, the government got over 90 cents on every dollar. He was like, I'm not giving that away for free. And so that happened early in his career, ticked him off. And so he made some policy shifts in the 80s that we're still living with today. We are historically low. When you look at Roth conversions, you are simply taking tax dollars that have been deferred. In other words, they never had taxes paid on them. You're saying, I owe you, IRS. Later, I'm going to pay you these taxes. And you're just pulling them through the tax hoop. You're saying, I'm going to pay taxes on that now, so I never have to pay them again, because I know what today's tax rates are, and I don't have any guarantee in what tomorrow's may be. Generally, a pretty good idea. It's hard to know specifically because you don't want to create a cash flow problem, that sort of thing, but it can be a pretty valuable tool to help take that risk off the table. I apologize, man. That's a good graph too. I'm going to keep looking. I'll bring it up if I can find it here.
Certainly. We had another one what is the best age for you to start receiving your spousal Social Security benefits?
Another one that varies by situation. However, some general patterns that we've seen, and we do some analysis. We have some software that actually helps analyze for a specific situation. It will depend a little on the difference in your ages. It will also depend on the amount of Social Security for each of you. If you have quite a difference in both of those, let's just go with the dollar amount. Suppose one spouse has twice the Social Security built up over the 40 quarters of qualifying working income and paying into the system as the other spouse. It is oftentimes better to defer till later the larger one and move up the smaller one. Now, that's not true in every case. That's why I kind of caveat that a little bit, but that is a pattern that we see. The other thing to keep in mind when you're making that choice is that if one spouse were to pass away, the surviving spouse, doesn't matter who it is, the surviving spouse gets the larger of the two Social Security paychecks, and they lose the smaller of the two. So that kind of enters into a little bit of do you want that larger one as large as possible for whoever the survivor is? And then the other thing to consider in that circumstance is if one spouse passes away, not only do they lose the smaller of the two Social Security checks, but they are also now filing as a tax individual, not married, filing jointly. So it's kind of a double whammy. So that is one of the what ifs that we help people navigate and plan for, because a lot of people forget about that tax whammy that comes with it as well.
We had another one. What are a few of your favorite financial books that you would recommend for your clients to read?
Oh man, that's a good one. Yeah, Ecclesiastes 11 for starters. If you're going to tap wisdom, tap Solomon's. He's actually talking about financial topics in that chapter. So if you don't believe me, go read it. That is the one. You maybe heard the verse, cast your bread upon many waters. In due time, it'll come back. He's actually talking about shipping goods over the ocean or the Mediterranean, likely. And he's telling you, don't get suckered into sending all your goods on one boat. Diversify. And in case we miss it the first time, he repeats it a few verses later in an agricultural context, which we appreciate in this state. And he says, you know, don't worry about whether to sell your grain in the morning or the evening. So do both, because you don't know which one's going to. So it's a good lesson in diversification. There is a book called Power of Zero, which is an intriguing idea. I wouldn't take it carte blanche in every situation, but it's a good mind bending kind of, hey, here's a good way to think about things. Yeah, those are probably two that come to mind. I would have to say that, you know, our perspective has been molded through the years, probably more by real life scenarios and less by books, but those are two decent ones. Yeah.
We had another one that was, any tips on how to avoid the minimum required distribution taxes?
Oh, yes. So if you're not familiar with required minimum distributions, or RMDs, we were talking earlier about the whole idea on Roth conversions and what happens when you take dollars that have never been taxed by the IRS and you pull them through the tax hoop and you now pay taxes on them so that they get them through on the other side. All those dollars that have not been taxed by the IRS, that's not out of the goodness of their heart. That 401k and all those pre-tax dollars, they're going to come looking for those dollars at some point, and that's what RMDs are. So depending on the year you were born, it would be either when you're 73 or 75. Whether you need the income or not, they say you're going to have to start taking those dollars, and we're going to tax them when you do as income, because we've never gotten our dollar back. The nice thing is at RMD ages, whether it's 73 or 75, they are both beyond the age 70 and a half. And one of the ways that you can help avoid that is at 70 and a half, you can do what is known as a qualified charitable distribution. And that says, I have a highly appreciated stock. I don't want to pay the taxes on it, but I'm charitably minded. I would like to donate this to XYZ charity, and it has to be a 501c3, a legitimate charity. Once you reach that age, you can actually direct it to go directly to that charity, and it skips past your taxes altogether. So instead of selling the stock, realizing the gain, and then being able to deduct that as a charitable deduction, it's a far more efficient way of giving to charities. It's a good way to help kind of avoid that a little bit. There's no real magic bullet to avoiding taxes other than dying. And then you don't get the benefit. Your beneficiaries do. So we don't recommend that as a strategy. As we like to say, you have to pay the tax man, but you don't have to tip him. So what we want to do is help people avoid unnecessary taxes.
Kind of on the other hand, we had a question then. They said, I'm 40 years old. I feel worried that it's too late for gaining a retirement goal. I don't have any student loans, but what kind of situation are they in there?
Sure. Well, first of all, good for you for not having any student loans and I'm assuming that means in general debt free or close. 40 is not too late. Okay. But kind of goes with the old adage, when's the best time to plant an oak tree? Well, 50 years ago and today. After that, the options get worse. So, the point is, start where you are today, have a plan. Assuming that you're thinking in terms of, age 65 approximately for retirement. Yeah, you have less time on your side, but you have time on your side. And so, yeah, without knowing more about the situation, I couldn't give a lot of specific advice, but start now, have a plan. Very, very few people stumble into success on accident.
And then we did have one, I don't know how much you can speak to it or what you would say, but they said, if I own a practice and cannot sell it, what would be the steps or requirements or costs to consider in closing down in order to be able to retire?
Yeah, good question. Now, I am neither an attorney nor an accountant, and they would need to be consulted. So I'll take just the financial part of that question and maybe a scenario that's shared by a lot of people on this call. You may be the owner of a practice and you say, I have a practice, I need to unwind it. And a lot of times it probably looks like finding someone to purchase the practice or purchase the relationships, however that normally goes. Or you may be a partner in a larger practice and you're going to be bought out by junior partners at some point. The financial part of that would be plan for the windfall. So as you're aware, in our country, we have a progressive tax system. What that means is the more dollars you earn, the higher percentage you pay in taxes. That means that if you have income that goes up and down by year, you end up paying probably more taxes than if it was steady. So if you're thinking of selling a business or trying to unwind it, plan for the windfall. In other words, have a strategy to help even out those taxes. You will end up paying taxes more efficiently as a result. Something that can work in those situations, and we've used this fairly extensively, actually. You may have heard of a donor advised fund. Probably the best way to think of it, if you're charitably minded, it can be a really good tool for a windfall situation. Think of it, we're all familiar with United Way, right? What is United Way? It's a 501c3. It's a charity, all right, but it's an umbrella charity. What do? They give dollars to other charities. A donor advised fund is basically like setting up your own United Way and then putting yourself on the board. And so in a case where you have a windfall and you have a lot of income, that can help, where you'd say, well, let me take the charitable dollars I was going to give over the next 10 years or 20. Let me give them all this year. Get a big deduction for the year that you have a spike in income. But then that charity doesn't have to actually feed it out to your target charities any differently in timing. So you get the deduction in the year you set up the donor advised fund, but the charities get the dollars as they would have for the next 10 years. A lot of times you'll see, I don't know, concerts or a show on PBS or something. It'll be sponsored by the such and such family foundation. A lot of times those are set up as donor advised funds, because if you set one up and you put yourself on the board as the advisor helping to direct where you want those dollars to go, you also have the right to name your successor advisors, which can oftentimes look like your children. And if that's something that you want to be sort of a family legacy, a lot of people will do that. So things to consider. But consult an attorney and accountant, of which I am neither. We work with them all the time, but yes, we don't do taxes, and you would want someone who really specializes in that area of law, I think.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from people on the call? Feel free to come off mute or send them through the chat.
I feel like I'm defending a dissertation or something.
Hello. Could you explain a little bit more about the Roth IRAs? I understand that the money is taxable in your IRA, but then if you convert it to a Roth, there is a certain quote tax for doing it, but then in retirement, you get to take that money tax-free?
That is correct. Yes. And the nice thing with doing that is when you pull the dollars from a pre-tax fund or a traditional IRA, if you pull it through that tax hoop, pay the taxes on it now, and it becomes a Roth IRA, you get to tap those dollars as a Roth IRA tax-free. And that includes the growth on them as well. So if you do that early on and maybe 20 years later, you're tapping those dollars, all the growth that you may have gotten in that Roth IRA, that's not taxable either. So you're done with taxes, which is the really nice thing. That's why it takes that risk off the table. Here's one more thing to think about: the advantages. If you have Roth money in retirement, it's a nice pot to be able to access if you have an unexpected expense, need a new roof, need a, whatever emergency. Because when you get into Medicare years, Medicare Part B is means tested. And so they have an IRMA tax that stands for IRMA. I forget what it stands for, but it's means testing, saying it's looking at your income and saying, 2 years ago, your income was this high. That means you get these rates for Medicare Part B, and it can be thousands of dollars different. If you have Roth IRA, it doesn't count against that measurement, and so it can save you money in other ways. So,
is there a limit to how much you can transfer from your regular IRA to a Roth?
There is, yeah. There's a convoluted set of rules that go with that. I mean, you can not conversion. Sorry, let me answer 2 questions there. There's a limit to the amount you can contribute to a Roth. There's what's known as a backdoor Roth conversion. And for most people on this call, your income is probably high enough that you would need to do that. And there's a limit on how much you can contribute every year. There is not a limit on the amount you can convert.
But conversion means you pay the higher taxes you're paying
Means you
now.
pay the taxes. Yeah. So it does go back to my other comments. As you're probably sensing here, there's a number of things that kind of have to be balanced out, because to my other comments about our progressive tax schedule, you don't want to create a big spike in income either, or you'll end up paying higher rates than if you could do it over time. So a lot of times what helps with a Roth conversion strategy is to target doing it over a certain number of years as opposed to all at once. I
Thank
guess
you.
if you saw a big tax jump coming, you maybe it would be better to do it. But in the absence of that, it might be better to do it over 5, even 10 years. Just systematically nibble away at it. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
We had a couple more in the chat here. You mentioned annuities. Are they a method of cash flow at retirement, but with high management costs?
Oh yes. It's funny, like a lot of times I get asked, what are your opinions on annuities? I'm like, what's your opinion on surgery? Like I am not a fan of unnecessary surgery, and I'm not a fan of bad annuities in the wrong. I've seen, like every other financial instrument, I've seen them misused. There are some bad ones out there. There are also some very good ones. I've found them most effectively used as a income creation tool. I use them myself, for example. Because I own a financial planning practice, much of my income has to do with the market. Not a surprise there, right? And so in separating that, I didn't want to make the Enron mistake of having both your retirement and your employment tied to the market. And so for me, it was a way to help diversify and create income in retirement. It can be very powerful. And in the particular instruments that I've used, there is no management fee. So a lot of the things that you'll read about on the internet, or people who are maybe anti-annuity, in some cases, they're not being entirely honest. What they will do is they will look at surrender charges and say, look at how expensive that is. You have a surrender schedule. Well, that's not really honest, because that's like saying I can't afford to drive. The speeding tickets are astronomical. Well, whose fault is that, right? Don't speed, right? And just like, leaving your cell phone contract early, or breaking a lease or anything, these kinds of things have consequences, but they're based on, on breaking the agreement. That's what those are. So if you look at the actual, there's some pretty efficient instruments out there, but there are some bad ones too. Yeah. You have to be careful. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but I would.
I believe so,
Yeah. We have a philosophy. We always want to start with a job to do and then work backwards to the toolbox. Like if I'm hanging a picture, a hammer is a perfect tool. If I'm working on my car and I have a hammer in my hand, something has gone really wrong.
Mhm.
So it's important to keep the job to do in mind.
Very good. Another one we had was general thoughts on 401k versus Roth 401k, which is better for high income positions since they're already up against the 37% tax bracket.
Yeah, there's that progressive tax schedule. I always like, if you can swing it, I really generally like to lean Roth if you can. And there's been a lot more options that have come available in the last few years, between companies needing to offer a Roth option. They've not always been offered. I would definitely try to take advantage of that if it doesn't create a cash flow problem. So I do like that, taking the tax risk off the table, because you don't know what future tax risks are going to be. It's just one more way to diversify, right? Have some dollars that you always want, some that are pre-tax, some that are post-tax. It's another way to diversify.
Any other questions from any of our participants on the call?
great questions. Lively group. I can tell everyone's made your coffee. I have mine here. So for this time
Dr.
of day.
Schaefer, would you mind speaking a little bit about LifeBridge and the coaching?
Yeah, I just want to put a plug in for coaching on the retirement segment alone. I've coached several physicians, and I know our coaches are equipped to do this too, about that retirement transition. It's not, sometimes people are looking forward to it. They have a plan, everything's golden, and you're good. What I've found with some physicians is that it brings up a lot of anxiety and what am I going to do? How am I going to do this transition? It's not just the financial component, but the social component and the what am I going to do with my brain component and staying active and engaged. And it just brings a lot of questions about that. And so I just want to put a plug in that LifeBridge is there to help you through that transition. Everything from having the conversation with your employer or your partners about, hey, I want to, decrease my schedule. What does that look like? To here's my end date. And we're going to work around that. And, sliding away from the practice of medicine and doing what, you want to do for the remainder of your years on this planet. So we're really helpful in that area. So I just, if you're on this call and you're thinking about it and you've got these anxieties or these great wishes and you want to plan on how to put it all together, we're here for you. And so I just want to put that plug in for you. Because for me, it's been one of the most fun coaching calls for us to have, is just be able to sit down and dream about what that plan looks like and make sure you've got your board of directors set up for you personally. And we're just a component of that. So don't forget that, that we're here for you. And then I just want to put a plug in for Stephen and the NMA. When I was a medical student, the NMA had a little booth outside the presentation hall. And I went out to talk to Stephen's dad, and he gave me, as a medical student, all this free financial advice for years until I had a paycheck. And then I wound up going with him because he's like, I like farmers, physicians, and military. And my husband was a Marine and retired as a Marine. And then I was going to be a physician and then was a physician. And he took care of me. And then Liz and Stephen took over the business, and they've been with me all along. And I just want to say thank you, Stephen, for sharing your wisdom here today. But also thank you to your family for being part of our family and part of our board of directors my entire career. I never made a dollar that didn't go through your family's management, your business management. And I'm very grateful for that, and grateful for you being here today to share your wisdom with all the other physicians. So
Thanks, Joanne. It's been great to get to know you and Phil and the cats.
Who are remarkably quiet today. They're usually all over my lap.
And on the topic of LifeBridge, if I could just share real quick, for those of you on the call who may not be as familiar with our program, LifeBridge is a resource for physicians here in the state. It's a free resource. It's also confidential. So following the passage of legislation in 2023, LifeBridge is the only program in the state that is protected under statute. So physicians participating in the program, they are protected against discovery of participation, not obligated to disclose your involvement to any other healthcare facility, hospital, health insurer, any other entity. And so we really value that. I know retirement may not be one of those issues that you're as concerned with, but we get a lot of different topics that come in that do concern confidentiality. And finally, our program does remain at no cost, and that's really thanks to the generosity of the organizations that help to support us and be able to put on webinars like this. And so we really appreciate that. But I know there was one other question, if we've got just a couple more minutes before I let you go, Stephen. Somebody did ask, does doing RMD into a Roth IRA count for the RMD component for an IRA, perhaps gradual additions or dollar cost averaging?
Yeah, that's a good question. Here's the thing. And so they're talking about RMDs again. So that was the required minimum distribution at age 73 or 75, depending on when you were born. If you're younger, it's 75. The one thing in order to do a Roth contribution is you have to have earned income. And so a lot of times at those ages, people don't. Now, if you did, that might be something to consider. That makes it a little less of a, I guess, common situation. The nice thing is once you take an RMD out, you've already paid the taxes. So the IRS at that point, lo and behold, lose interest in what you do with that dollar. So if you want to save it or you want to spend it or you want to, put it as part of a savings program, Roth or not. But Roth does require earned income, not just like dividends and interest, but earned income in order to make a contribution. So you might be limited by that. Sure. But someone's thinking the right way. I appreciate the question.
Also for everybody on the call, I did just drop the CME link today in the chat, but that will also be available shortly on our website with the recorded version of this call. But if there are no other questions, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. This was really helpful. We probably our most asked questions in a webinar, so we really appreciate that.
Okay. Well, either I was really unclear or there was a high level of interest. So I'll choose to believe the second. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.
You bet.